I saw a lot of people really excited about that, which I think is fundamentally insane. I'm bummed that it's shutting down, man. I don't think it's easy to build a game. I don't think it's easy to take a game from start to where XDefiant actually finished. And I think the game was pretty fun in some regard or another, but the people that are like celebrating on the bodies of XDefiant, I think are psychotic.
There was a couple of reasons why I think XDefiant kind of dropped the ball. There wasn't replayability. Like, the camos and stuff weren't enough to have me coming back and being like, fuck yeah, I need that. Whenever rank dropped, they cataclysmically fucked up the rank drop. And they also delayed the release of it, and it kind of matched up with Call of Duty.
The foundation of XDefiant was incredible, but as we all know, the real problems with the game stemmed from the fact that there was nothing really to do in the game. It was too bare bones, despite the fact that it was delayed and delayed and delayed. There was nothing really to grind for in the game. I don't think you can survive at this day and age on good gameplay alone. There needs to be robust progression paths and things for players to look forward to, and they started to add those mastery camos, but they were so grindy. Even someone like me who played the game more than most, I'm in the top 5% in the world for pretty much everything with an XDefiant. I played the game more than most. Even for me, it's just like there's not enough to do here, and these camo grinds are just painfully long.
The primary reason that I think that XDefiant's execution was so sudden and swift and nobody really saw it coming is it's super bizarre how this game is shutting down. Season 3 for XDefiant is still coming out. The game is getting shut down. We have the announcement of the shutdown on June 3rd, but they're still going to go ahead and release Season 3, so that makes me think that this game's execution just was a surprise. You know, turns out lights are off, and that kind of makes sense if you look at the social media profiles of the XDefiant people, because they're talking about things in the future, and they were probably just as surprised. I bet this was a C-suite executive decision.
It is such a shame, man. I did like XDefiant during beta, but once it came full release, I didn't touch it. There was other games that it was competing with, like it released in the middle of other games I was playing. Never went to it. Then I just played the new Call of Duty when it came.
Subscribe to CryoJustin on YouTube!
Ow! We always hear the term COD killer all the time, don't we? A new game drops and suddenly it's the next big thing destined to dethrone Call of Duty. Every flashy trailer, every hyped beta, every Reddit thread filled with "this is it" energy. It's a cycle we've seen 1,000 times before. But here we are, decades later, and COD is still standing and still dominating. Sure, it's changed, evolved, and some might even say devolved. It's not the same beast that wowed us back in the days of Modern Warfare 2 lobbies and quickscoping in Black Ops. Yet, despite the rise of battle royales, live service shooters, and new franchises claiming their piece of the pie, COD refuses to fade away. It's almost poetic in a way. The quote-unquote COD killer isn't just a label for some game. It's an idea, a challenge, a target painted on the back of a juggernaut. And every year, gamers collectively hold their breath, hoping this time, the new contender will finally do it. But here's the thing. COD isn't just a game anymore, it's a culture, a nostalgia trip, and a comfort zone for millions of players who grew up yelling into their Turtle Beach headsets at 3 AM. So what's it gonna take? A better engine, a more engaging multiplayer experience, or maybe the secret isn't about killing COD at all. Maybe it's about offering something fresh, something that stands on its own without the need for comparisons. Because, let's face it, the only thing harder than killing Call of Duty is escaping its shadow. Then there was XDefiant. A fresh, arcade-style shooter, a callback to the glory days of fast-paced gunplay with no battle royale distractions. Ubisoft pitched it like a love letter to the COD fans who felt abandoned by modern trends. No skill-based matchmaking, no pay-to-win nonsense, and factions with unique abilities like the ultimate mashup of everything we thought we loved. It was hyped up as a game that would take us back to the good old days, the days where you ground out gold camos and map knowledge actually mattered. And for a moment, it felt like XDefiant really might pull it off. The beta had players buzzing, streamers gave it a nod, old school FPS fans gave it a shot, and for the first time in a while, the phrase COD killer didn't feel like a joke. The movement was tight, the gunplay was snappy, and the maps? Actual real maps with 3 lanes like the love letter to COD's heyday? People started to dream. Maybe this was the one. Maybe this was the game to break the cycle. But then came the reality check. Bugs, delays, and the sense that Ubisoft was biting off more than they could chew. It had heart, sure, but heart alone doesn't keep a player base loyal. The shooter space is unforgiving, and for all its ambition, XDefiant struggled to nail down that elusive polish that kept players coming back. It wasn't that it was bad, it was solid, but solid isn't enough when you're scoring up against the likes of Call of Duty. Still, it left a mark. It proved that there was a hunger for something different, something that scratches that nostalgic itch without drowning in corporate bloat. And maybe that's the point of games like XDefiant. Not to kill COD, but to remind us that the throne isn't invincible, that the community is willing to embrace changes when it's done right. Then, Ubisoft happened. Oh, how Ubisoft happened.
Hello, I like money.
If XDefiant was a spark of hope, Ubisoft was the bucket of water standing by, ready to douse it. The studio, known for its sprawling open-world games and repetitive formulas, had a rare chance to break free and make something fresh, and for a moment, it felt like they could actually pull it off. But this is Ubisoft we're talking about. Masters of overpromising and under-delivering. First, there were the delays. Not one or two, but a string of them, each accompanied by vague promises of ensuring quality. Then came the bizarre certification issues, as if it was their first time launching a game. It wasn't just a stumble, it was a full-on faceplant. Players who were ready to give XDefiant a shot found themselves stuck in limbo, their enthusiasm fading with every missed launch window. Ubisoft's handling of the situation made it feel like a cruel joke. This was the game that was meant to compete with Call of Duty, yet it couldn't even make it to release day without tripping over itself. And then there's that Ubisoft touch, that inexplicable knack for turning excitement into skepticism. Monetization plans, vague updates, and a creeping sense that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the passion the project it claimed to be. It started to feel like Ubisoft's heart really wasn't in it, like they were too busy with the next Assassin's Creed or whatever live service experiment they had cooking.
If that's not illegal, it certainly should be.
By the time XDefiant limped onto the scene, the damage was done. The hype was gone, replaced by apathy. It wasn't fair to the game, not really. XDefiant had a base of something great, but Ubisoft's inability to read the room or stick the landing left it as yet another cautionary tale in a sea of almost. And you know what? That's the tragedy here. XDefiant didn't have to be perfect. It just had to deliver on its promises. But in true Ubisoft fashion, it overcomplicated, overpromised, and underdelivered. And so, the cycle continues. Another COD killer comes and goes, leaving us wondering if anyone will ever get it right, or we're just doomed to keep living in Call of Duty shadow forever. But how did we get to this point in the first place? For that, we have to go to the beginning. The beginnings of XDefiant trace back to Ubisoft's attempt to create something different in the competitive first-person shooter space. The game was originally announced in July of 2021 as a fast-paced arena-style shooter that would combine elements of classic Call of Duty-style gameplay with a fresh, faction-based twist. It was developed by Ubisoft San Francisco, a team led by Mark Rubin, a former producer on the Call of Duty series. Rubin's involvement immediately gave XDefiant credibility among FPS fans, especially those nostalgic for the golden era of Call of Duty. The idea was simple. Take the polished, high-octane gunplay that players love from games like Modern Warfare and Black Ops, and blend it with unique faction elements inspired by Ubisoft's vast library of IPs. The factions, called Defiants, were drawn from Ubisoft's other games like Splinter Cell, The Division, and Ghost Recon. Each faction had its own set of abilities and playstyles, adding a layer of strategy to the game without veering into a hero shooter territory like Overwatch or Apex Legends. At its core, XDefiant aimed to be a throwback and meant to bring back the simplicity and fun of classic FPS games, with a focus on gunplay and map control rather than the bloated mechanics and RNG elements that had crept into modern shooters. The game also promised features like no skill-based matchmaking and casual playlists, dedicated servers, and a commitment to listening to the community, things that Call of Duty fans have been begging for years. From the start, XDefiant positioned itself as a game for the players. Ubisoft's marketing emphasized it as a free-to-play model, cross-play functionality, and the absence of pay-to-win elements. Early trailers and gameplay showcased highlights of fast-paced, arcade-like action, and the initial response from the community was cautiously optimistic. It felt like a game built to fill the void left by the changing landscape of shooters, a love letter to the classics but with enough modern flair to stand out. However, even in its early stages, there were signs of trouble. The initial reveal was met with skepticism, particularly over the game's branding. Originally titled Tom Clancy's XDefiant, the inclusion of the Tom Clancy name felt like a desperate attempt to leverage an existing brand rather than letting the game stand on its own. The backlash was swift, and Ubisoft eventually dropped the Tom Clancy label, signaling an early course of correction, but also highlighting a lack of confidence in the game's ability to carry itself. Despite these early hiccups, the game's beta test generated buzz. Players praised the snappy gunplay, the nostalgia-inducing map design, and the lack of skill-based matchmaking in casual matches. For a moment, it seemed like XDefiant might actually live up to its promise of being a fresh alternative to Call of Duty. But as the game moved closer to launch, the cracks began to show, and Ubisoft's mishandling of the rollout would ultimately overshadow its potential. As XDefiant moved closer to launch, the optimism started to waver. The cracks that had been easy to overlook and the excitement of the beta test became impossible to ignore. The delays began piling up, each one accompanied by vague explanations about ensuring quality or addressing technical issues. It's not uncommon for a live service game to face hiccups, but in Ubisoft's case, it felt more like a pattern of mismanagement than a sign of care. And then there was that elephant in the room. Ubisoft's financial troubles. By the time XDefiant was near release, the company was already struggling to keep its head above water. With major IPs like Star Wars Outlaws and Avatar Frontiers of Pandora underperforming, Ubisoft had little room for error. The reality was simple. XDefiant wasn't a top priority for the publisher. Despite its potential, the game was ultimately a smaller project in Ubisoft's portfolio, a risky bet in the time when the company couldn't afford to take risks. This lack of support became increasingly apparent. Marketing for XDefiant was inconsistent, and updates from the development team often felt like they were fighting an uphill battle to keep the game relevant. The fanbase that had rallied around the game during its early stages began to shrink, not because the game itself was bad, but because the momentum has been lost. It's hard to build excitement when even the publisher seems unsure about the game's future. You know, Ubisoft's story lately feels like a tragic play with a predictable ending. They put all their chips on the table, banking on massive IPs like Star Wars Outlaws and Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora to carry their fiscal year, but guess what? Neither of them delivered the kind of success that Ubisoft needed to stabilize their shaky foundation. Star Wars Outlaws sold over 1 million copies in the first month, which sounds good until you realize this is Star Wars we're talking about. A franchise of that size should have smashed records, but instead, it barely moved the needle. And then there's Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora. Despite pulling in 1.9 million players, it just couldn't capture the magic of the films. Ubisoft's ambitious projections turned out to be just that, ambitions, not reality. Without those blockbusters pulling their weight, Ubisoft found themselves starting at a massive revenue gap for Q3 and Q4. And you know what that means? Sacrifices. Smaller, riskier projects like XDefiant, a game that actually showed promise as a live service FPS, got axed because Ubisoft couldn't afford to keep them alive. Then came the Assassin's Creed Shadows debacle. Originally set for November 15, 2024, it got pushed to Valentine's Day 2025 because of poor early reception. Apparently, Ubisoft just realized it couldn't compete with Sony's highly anticipated Ghost of Yodi later that year. But this delay is a double-edged sword. Now Shadows has to hit big and fast, with Ubisoft's fiscal year ending in just 6 weeks after its release. No pressure, right? If this one stumbles, it's game over for their already stretched financials. And that brings us to XDefiant. This wasn't a bad game. In fact, they were doing a lot of things right. Clean gunplay, solid hit registration, and a growing fan base with each new season. But Ubisoft? They didn't have the patience or the vision to see it through. They were so focused on salvaging their aging franchises like Assassin's Creed that XDefiant got left in the dust, a casualty of corporate priorities. This short-term thinking has been Ubisoft's magnum opus for years now. Studio closures, R&D budgets, and ballooning marketing costs, all in the name of keeping their biggest franchises afloat. They've leaned so hard on Assassin's Creed and Rainbow Six that they're practically squeezing the life out of them. Fans are tired, the games feel bloated, repetitive, and uninspired. Yet Ubisoft keeps churning them out because, frankly, they don't know what else to do at this point. And the numbers tell the entire story. A €494 million loss in 2022 to 2023, a brief moment of profitability in 2023-2024 thanks to drastic cost cutting, only to swing back to a €246 million loss in the first half of 2024 to 2025. Their share price has plummeted down to $11.80, and their market cap hit sits at €1.52 billion, a steep fall for a company that once dominated the industry. And here's the kicker, this all smells like prep work for a buyout. Cut the fat, streamline operations, double down on safe franchises. These are the moves of a company trying to look appealing to potential buyers. Tencent already holds a big stake, and it wouldn't be surprising if Ubisoft is angling for a full acquisition. It's a sad state of affairs. Instead of taking risks, building new IPs, and fostering innovation, Ubisoft is clinging to the past, hoping their legacy can save them. But if they're not careful, they might not have a legacy to protect. So, what's the moral of this story? XDefiant was supposed to be Ubisoft's big statement. A defiant shout into the void of an FPS market dominated by Call of Duty. It had everything going for it, the nostalgia of tight, fast-paced gameplay, a fresh faction-based twist, and a promise of bringing players back to the days when shooters were about skill and strategy, not just endless monetization and focusing on fun. For a moment, it felt like it could have been the one, the game that reminded the industry how to do it right. But potential doesn't pay the bills, and Ubisoft, a company already on shaky ground, didn't have the resources or perhaps the conviction to see it through. Instead of nurturing XDefiant into something truly special, they let it flounder, bogged down by corporate chaos, financial missteps, and a lack of long-term vision. The delays, the mishandled rollout, and the inconsistent support, it all pointed to a publisher that wanted a winner but wasn't willing to take the necessary risks. And that's the tragedy, isn't it? XDefiant wasn't bad, it was a great game. It wasn't an overambitious flop or a soulless cash grab, it was a game with heart, a game that tried to bring something different to the table. But in the end, it was crushed by the very machine that created it. Ubisoft, too focused on salvaging its aging flagship franchises and too mired in its own financial troubles, sacrificed what could have been a new pillar of its brand. So, here we are. Looking back at what XDefiant could have been, a contender, a disruptor, and a reminder of the simpler joys of shooters. Instead, it became another what if in the industry littered with them. Ubisoft wanted it to be defiant. Instead, it became a symbol of their complacency, their over-reliance on the past, and their inability to adapt. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. In gaming, as in life, you can't build a future by clinging on to the past. At some point, you have to take the leap, no matter how risky. XDefiant could have been that leap, but now it's just another name on a growing list of missed opportunities. But I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell for future notifications. We're surprisingly close to 1,000 subscribers when I didn't even think we were going to hit 900. So first of all, holy shit. I love you all. I'm going to keep pushing out videos for you guys. If you have any suggestions of what I want to talk about, put them in the comment section. You guys are awesome. But with all that being said, I love all you beautiful people, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.